Hey everybody, this is Dave from Steel City Jones Flight Academy. Welcome to our very first webcast. We've been meaning to do a webcast now for quite some time, and here we are. We're finally ready to get going, and we're going to take questions from our students. We're going to bring in different guest speakers in the industry and talk about a wide variety of topics in the drone industry. And for our very first episode, I can't think of a better speaker to bring in and have Kevin Morris from the FAA join us. I've known Kevin for a little more than a year now, and I've reached out to him from time to time, and he's been a great resource to have. And I posed a question to him. I said, hey, would you like to do a podcast with me one day? And he said, great, go ahead, round up some questions, and we'll do it. So that's exactly what I did. I reached out to all my students, and I said to them, if you could ask the FAA one question, what would it be? And I got a wide variety of questions, which was great. And that is I can ask Kevin a wide variety of different type of topics, which we covered, and it turned out great. So with that said, I'm excited to bring you the very first webcast. So let's get started. Kevin, we've been trying to do this now for a while, and I'm real excited about finally being able to get going on this. I wanted to thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I looked through all of the emails, all the questions, and a lot of them were repeats. A lot of them were very similar in nature, and I thought that I got some really the best. I thought was the best stuff to go with. That way we can cover a wide range of different things, and I think it would be a very good, productive conversation.
Yeah, excellent. I really appreciate it. It's nice to see that type of response. I'm also very appreciative of being on this podcast here with you today, Dave. Like you mentioned, we've been kind of working towards this for a while here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with people like yourself to try to help get the word out and maybe to clear up any confusion that's out there for drone pilots.
Absolutely. I can't wait to get started here. So I'll just read the first question to you from what the first reader gave me is Kevin, what's your feedback on the recurrent 107 test? Many pilots feel the 107 test should be more in line with what the recurrent test is now. Example would be like more concentration on airspace and sectional charts and stuff. How did the changes come about, and do you foresee any changes to the original 107 more like the recurrent test?
Great question. The Part 107 test and the recurrent test now have been out for a little while. Mm-hmm. And what we do is we continually evaluate the data we receive back from the testing centers. For example, we can take a look at data for a particular subject area, or we can even drill down to a very specific question and look at the data from that. And the data that I'm talking about is what type of responses are we getting? Are we getting the responses that we want from the test takers, or is it a bad question? Or are we looking at a particular area where we have a lot of people missing a lot of questions in a particular area? So we're constantly evaluating that data as it comes back from the testing centers so that we can modify and change the test as we move forward. And the recurrent test is probably a perfect example of how that data and test changing can work. When we looked at the data from the initial Part 107 test and the information we got back, that helped drive how the recurrent test looks for pilots going back to the testing centers to take that on a 2-year basis. Mm-hmm. So look at all that data, plus we combine it with our current surveillance reports or enforcement reports, and we're continually trying to modify those tests so that they're accurate, they're measuring what we want measured, and they're understandable by the test takers.
Okay. And I would imagine then just like the 107, original 107, the initial test and a recurrent test are probably going to be the same formats, basically, or the same type of test for probably at least the next year, I would say. Would that be an accurate assessment?
I would think so. I'm not directly involved with the testing department here at the FAA, but I know it takes a while for us to get that data back. And if we look at the recurrent testing, that really hasn't been going on that long. It's only been a few months or so to speak since we've had people going in and taking that recurrent test. So like the initial, I can assure you we'll go back and look at that recurrent test as well to see what questions we may need to modify.
Okay, that's excellent. The second question is, now that LAANC has been nationwide since September, when does the FAA expect the system to be fully updated to all airports?
Probably one of the most popular questions we get is when are all these airports going to be incorporated into LAANC? To be clear, our goal has always been to incorporate all towered airports into LAANC. And that's a huge undertaking, if you can imagine. There are certain challenges that remain, in particular with contract towers or military facilities to get those folks into LAANC. But we're taking it in sort of phased approaches. And the initial phase was to try to get as many airports, so we're talking about straight up FAA staffed air traffic facilities, into LAANC. And if you remember, we did that in, I believe it was 6 waves as they kind of came across the United States.
Yes.
That was just the beginning. So we're still working towards incorporating all that into LAANC. But, as with any program in any business or organization, you run up against human resource capital and financial capital to make all that happen. But rest assured, our goal has always been to incorporate all towered airports into LAANC. I should add to that controlled airspace as well, because certainly Class Echo 2, or that surface Class Echo airspace, is another airspace that requires LAANC authorization.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, it's a great system. We went down to Miami last winter, where it was just actually in the prototype stages, and tested it down there and made a LAANC video tutorial and everything, and that those have been very popular. And you can't ask for something better than just getting a quick text message on your phone instantly like that. Compared to what we were facing before that, it's like night and day. It's a significant improvement.
Yeah, I agree. It was. I think you said it best. It was like night and day. We went from essentially getting angry emails about how long our airspace authorizations were taking pre-LAANC to complimentary emails like, LAANC is great, thank you, thank you, thank you. And now we're moving on to the next phase of, okay, when is airport ABC going to come online? So it's definitely been well received by the drone community, and it's really been a positive program for us here at the FAA.
Yeah, now, it couldn't have been structured any better, because, for the simple authorizations, that's, you were able to streamline that real good. And then for the waivers that need a little more consideration and research, it's that you were able to separate those really good to facilitate the easier ones.
Absolutely right. Yep.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about helicopters. Kevin, I have been flying drones for over 9 years. I was custom building drones way back when, way before you could even buy a drone. And my number one concern all the way back then to right now, myself as a personal, this as a 107 licensed operator, is the fear of helicopters. Just the ability for them to come out of anywhere at any time with hardly any warning. Many people have the false sense that, well, you could see a helicopter coming from 5 miles away. What's the big deal? But it's not never always that case, especially when we're from behind us and the surroundings are around us where they can mask the sound. And you can have all the safety protocols in place for risk management and all the types of risk mitigation strategies and a spotter and everything, but they can still roll up on you really fast. So I thought I would include a question from a student that asked specifically, who says, many remote pilots have had near misses with helicopters as they can come out of anywhere at any time. Do you envision any minimum altitude restrictions for helicopters in the future? If not, do you envision any type of transponders being mandated for drones?
Yeah, good question. And that having those near misses or those conflicts with manned aircraft and unmanned aircraft are something that we're very concerned with here at the FAA for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
One of the things right away I'd like to point out is that while helicopters certainly can, I think, use your words like pop up when you weren't expecting them, they're not the only low-flying manned aircraft that you could run into.
Good point.
Clearly, depending on where you're flying, even if you're way out in the country, we routinely have aerial applicators, which most people call crop dusters, flying around at very low altitudes and at relatively high speeds. And for the same reason that terrain or trees can mask the sound of an approaching helicopter, they can do the same with the crop dusters coming in. So it's not only an issue that we're concerned about near metro areas, but certainly out in the rural country as well. Our goal at the FAA has always been to integrate manned and unmanned aircraft. So we've worked really hard at trying not to put real hard dividers between manned and unmanned aircraft, with the expectation that as technology improves, as drones improve, as the command and control links improve, that we're going to see more and more integration. So based on that, I don't see any changes to what we're really talking about here, which I believe is 91-119, which are minimum safe altitudes for helicopters. Remember, as a drone pilot, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Dave, and tell your students all the time, they must give way and not interfere with manned aircraft at all times.
Right.
Now, that can be difficult depending on where you're operating if you can't see or hear the inbound manned aircraft. So my recommendation has always been, consider the area where you're operating. And if it's an area where there's a potential, regardless of how slight that potential might be for a manned aircraft or helicopter to come in, maybe we want to employ more visual observers than we normally do. And maybe we want those visual observers to be positioned where they can see or hear the inbound aircraft. And that would give the remote pilot and command more time to deconflict with that aircraft and land until the conflict is resolved or the aircraft is clear from the area. But I don't see any restrictions going any further than what we see in Part 107 now and what we see under Part 91 for manned aircraft operations either. Again, the goal is always to integrate and do it in the safest manner possible. So once more, I would ask that if you're operating in an area where maybe there's a helipad nearby or where you're not that far away from an airport, to sort of reduce that additional risk by employing different resources or technologies to help you out.
Absolutely. I mean, it all goes back to aeronautical decision making, right? And risk management and the risk mitigation strategies. You know, we've talked about that many times in the past, you know, just ourselves, and that's what it all comes down to.
Yes. And to the second part of the question about the transponders, I don't foresee any mandate for unmanned aircraft to carry transponders in the traditional sense that we think of in manned aircraft. Or some people have asked about, what about putting ADS-B out transmitters on unmanned aircraft? What we're really trying to do, and this is a work in progress that we're looking at, is the unmanned traffic management, so the UTM, and trying to figure out how we can incorporate an unmanned traffic management system into future UAS operations to further help mitigate that risk of a conflict between a manned and unmanned aircraft.
Sure, and there's new technology all the time being developed. I mean, DJI is incorporating that right now into what's called AirSense, and I'm sure this is just a touch of the iceberg with where we're going with everything.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about airspace next. So airspace is obviously, it's very confusing to a lot of people, and so one of the questions here that is specifically asked, I thought was a really good question was, and this is because it does get a little bit of confusing, especially with some of the terminology and the phrasing. So it'd be great for you to be able to answer the question. I get all the, I answer these questions all the time, but just being able to hear it from an official person like yourself would be great. So the question states is, under Part 107, it doesn't specifically say the words controlled airspace in its regulations. Part 107.4.1 says, no person may operate a UAS within the lateral boundaries of Class E airspace. This phrase has been interpreted a couple different ways, where some people don't believe it applies to the height of Class E2 airspace. Some people believe you can fly 400 feet above any obstacle without an authorization or waiver, regardless of how high that structure is, even if it's above where the Class E starts above the surface, like example, 700 feet or 1,200 feet. So what are your thoughts on that type of situation?
It's a great question because it's an area of confusion amongst many people in the stakeholder community. And I'm glad I have the opportunity to help clarify it a little bit. Let's look at it in two different parts. You've got the requirement in 107.41, which states that you're going to need an FAA authorization to operate in the surface, within the lateral boundaries of a surface area for Class E, right? That's around an airport. So we can look at the FAA aeronautical charts and you can see where those areas are. Yeah. You can see that there are dashed magenta lines around the airport. So that is where Class E begins at the surface. To get a little technical, we refer to that as Class E2 or Echo 2 airspace.
Yes.
So if you're operating within Echo 2 airspace, you will need an FAA air traffic authorization. And I believe all the E2 airspaces are now displayed on the UAS facility maps that we make available to everyone. So you can see that, what we call a grid map.
Exactly.
Further confusion comes along with how 10751 gives a remote pilot the authorization to fly higher than 400 feet if they're within a certain radius of a structure. So we'll use a tower example. So let's put that tower into Class Echo 2 airspace, and let's say that that tower exists where there's a grid with a maximum altitude displayed of 100 feet. But it's a 200-foot tall tower, and you've been asked to go do an inspection at the top of that tower. You're going to need to request an airspace authorization from the FAA because it's Echo 2 or Surface Class E airspace. If your authorization allows you to fly to 100 feet, let's say, because that's all you requested, because that's what the grid said, that airspace authorization becomes controlling. You would not be able to go above 100 feet, even though Part 10751 has a provision for you to do that. Why? Because the authorization you receive from the FAA is controlling.
Right.
So now take that same scenario and let's move it out of Class Echo 2 airspace, or out of that Surface E airspace around an airport. And let's put the tower in, let's say, Class G airspace. And let's say that tower is 1,000 feet tall. But Class E airspace starts at 700 feet because of a transition area. Remember, the only time you're going to need an authorization for Class E airspace is when you're flying within that surface area surrounding an airport, that Echo 2 airspace.
Yeah.
Class E airspace that exists outside of that area does not require an authorization. Therefore, in the second scenario I'm giving, where you have the 1,000-foot tower that goes into Class Echo airspace at 700 feet above ground level, you would not need an authorization, and you would be able to use the provisions in 107.51 to fly that mission, to go to the top of that tower plus 400 feet, staying within that radius to do your work.
Perfect. I couldn't have said that any better. And that's, I mean, it's very confusing to a lot of people based upon a lot of different moving parts to that equation. I think you answered that brilliantly.
Good.
So the next question from our students comes from a law enforcement agent. We do a lot of public safety training. So the question is, are there any plans in place to speed up or otherwise modify the SGI waiver process? Right now, public safety pilots have to fill out a Word document and email it to the FAA and wait. They are allowing us to submit it after the fact, but that encourages people to fly in dangerous situations, in my opinion. What are your thoughts?
Good question. I would hope that nobody feels encouraged to fly in a dangerous situation or accept some sort of unacceptable level of risk into their operations. Mm-hmm. The SGI process actually works quite well. Most of the reports I get back is that for legitimate emergencies, there are options available to public safety groups to receive an SGI COA in a matter of minutes. There's options available to them. We outline all of those on our website at faa.gov/UAS. Yeah. So if you're a public safety entity and you need to get authorization to get into an area with your drone and it's a legitimate emergency, I encourage you to go to our website and review the process, because there are options for you via a telephone call to get an authorization from the FAA to go fly literally within minutes of you making that request. So there are options available. Again, check our website out. It should not be a situation where you feel you're being encouraged, or forced is a bad word, but forced to fly in an area that, or in a method that's unsafe. We definitely don't want that. So if that's happening with your agency, please take another look at the process that we have online, because there are other options for you.
Right. And also another avenue that I talk a lot about with our public safety agents is just going down the COA process. And the COA process is another great avenue to have. And I think that's pretty much why that's there. And that's kind of almost opens that up for the public agencies to be able to do what they need.
Yes, yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, so the next question is regarding ATC. And this is, I mean, I see this all the time. So this would be a great way to, a great discussion point for you. So there's quite the debate online as to whether or not you need to get, or I should say, that verbal authorization from ATC is good enough for drone pilots to fly in controlled airspace. Some argue the FAA handles all the authorizations in writing, and this has become a sticking point for some LAANC requests, meaning trying to fly 100 feet high in a altitude grid that's 0, for example, where it's basically what they're doing then at that point is calling the control tower and saying, hey, I'm out here, do you see any problems with this? And a lot of controllers are saying, no, go ahead, just not a problem, let me know when you're done. Some are very wanting to be very considerate to the operations at hand, but where does the FAA stand from a technical standpoint as far as needing to have it in writing or not?
Sure. A great question again, and I'm glad you asked, because this is another, as you pointed out, source of confusion for a lot of folks out there flying when it comes to receiving their authorization.
Right.
And Dave, I've seen all kinds. I've seen where people have recorded air traffic authorizing them to fly on their phone. I've seen it where there's been a memo signed by the air traffic facility authorizing them to fly. It's important to remember that there are two guiding principles here at the FAA when it comes to airspace authorizations. One is what we publish to everyone out there to say, hey, look, if you need an authorization, you're going to go get it via one of two methods, either through LAANC, through one of our FAA authorized LAANC UAS service suppliers, or you're going to use the Drone Zone web-based portal. Air traffic has its own guidance as well that requires them that if they receive a phone call from somebody who says, hey, I want to fly out here, are you okay with it? They are required to redirect that individual to LAANC or Drone Zone to get their authorization. So while I probably couldn't sit here and say you absolutely are required by regulation to have a written authorization, because I don't believe that would be an accurate statement, the guidance both internally on the flight standard side and as well as the air traffic side does require an individual to submit their authorization request through LAANC or through the Drone Zone portal. So those are really the two approved methods for you to receive your authorization. Now, you did hit on one of the sticking points that people run into, which is whether it's a 0 grid or a 100-foot grid, but you need to go higher. How does that work? You still need to submit your request through Drone Zone or through LAANC. But if you're looking at an area and you have enough time, air traffic is going to want to see what additional mitigations you're taking for that airspace authorization request. So it would be best to try to get that information to the tower, not request the authorization from the tower, but supply them with the information that they need so that they can assess the risk that your drone operation is going to pose in their area. Because remember, those grid maps aren't arbitrary. They're looked at by the air traffic facility in that area, and they've said, we can accept the additional risk up to this altitude in this area. And when you talk about the 0 grids, which we all know are relatively close to the airport, that's where air traffic has said, we can't accept any additional risk. That's not saying that they're going to say no. It's just that they don't want to accept the risk without some further mitigation. So you really need to supply the facility with the additional information to tell them how you're going to mitigate that risk. Your authorization still needs to be submitted through LAANC or Drone Zone, and your authorization to fly will still be issued through LAANC or Drone Zone, but you certainly can supply additional information to that facility to help you out.
You know, another way we at our school look at it is that we look at it to try to prepare everybody for the worst type of situation that can come up. So the way I look at it is, well, what happens if you have an accident? You know, what if you go out and fly? Let's say you're going to get verbal approval, and then you have an accident. And then, then you have to get your insurance company involved, or you have to get, or there is an FAA investigation. having that written permission is going to cover yourself. And that just protects yourself as well as a drone operator, protects your clients. That's just the right way to go. A lot of people think, well, the FAA is making me do this. Well, it's not. It's more in line of you as a professional, what you need to do as a professional.
Absolutely. I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah. So Kevin, let's talk a little bit about how flight proficiencies has a role into the commercial airspace for integration. Some people actually had the same thoughts on this type of question, so I kind of just composed it into one main type of question. I thought that would be a good way to pose it to you. So the question starts out by saying, some remote pilots feel the FAA went from a bit over-regulated with the 333 requirement requiring drone operators to get licenses to fly airplanes to being a little bit under-regulated now with the 107 not needing any flying proficiency demonstration. Basically, many people think that this has brought the barrier of entry down a little in the field too low, which results in many underqualified pilots having no business flying. Knowing that the FAA resources are limited because of the amount of drone pilots that are out there, do you foresee the FAA changing anything to add any flying proficiencies or requirements to the remote pilot certificate?
Yeah, good. Thank you for the question. Similar to the knowledge test for the initial and the recurrent that we do for drone pilots, we have the Airman Certification Standards, which gives us the outlining document for how somebody receives their remote pilot certificate. We are reviewing those circumstances all the time. So we look at the standards, we look at what's happening out there, we look at the test results, and constantly working to strive to make that Airman Certification Standards just as effective as the knowledge test that people are taking. That being said, I don't see anything currently that's going to move us towards having a flight portion test to the remote pilot certificate. The critical element we feel when it comes to operating under Part 107 is the knowledge base, making sure you understand what airspace is, how you fit into the national airspace system, and really some of the things like aeronautical decision making that we talked a little bit about earlier. All these things are very, very important to a new entrant into the aviation community. So we're focusing more on the knowledge piece right now. Not to say that maybe someday down the road we don't change something, but unfortunately I don't have the crystal ball to look into to see that. Yeah. But I can tell you currently I don't see any movement towards requiring a flight test portion for the remote pilot certificate.
Okay, well that's fair enough. Thanks for the answer. Now, so one question that probably was the most popular submitted type of a question is basically about incidents and enforcement of rules and regulations. So basically, here, and this is just basically from one student right here. When will the FAA start enforcing the drone rules? It seems that a lot of people are out there breaking rules left and right, and nothing's being done about it. Now, I can tell you from my own personal standpoint, I know that I have seen very concerning issues out there with people flying. I know not definitely way over, like flying directly over hundreds of people in a concert, for example. And even to a certain extent where I've actually myself have issued a complaint. I have myself have gotten, an FAA inspector calling me back and asking me to get some information. So I know the FAA does investigate that. I know those type of things. From your standpoint, would you like to comment on that type of a question?
Absolutely. And I think out of all the questions we've had here in this podcast, this question is probably one of the first questions I'm ever asked at any event by the drone community is what you just asked or what your student submitted for you to ask. I'm going to start off by saying we are enforcing the drone rules. It's not something we're ignoring. It's not something that we've got into a to-do bucket that we just never get to. We very, very much enforce the drone rules. There's been a lot of enforcement actions, just even in the past few years, against UAS operators that are operating contrary to regulation. And what they usually amount to are fines of some sort. Um, the issue is that most people in the public don't see that work happening in the background. And our primary means, and this is something that I really want to stress here, our primary means to ensure compliance with the rules is not enforcement. The first thing we try to go to is education, counseling, and training. That's all part of our compliance policy here at the FAA. So the first course of action when somebody's potentially been violating the regulations isn't to come after them with legal action and fines and court hearings and everything. It's really just to pull that individual aside and say, okay, look, let's try to educate you. Let's try to make you understand why the rules are there, what they mean to you, and how it's important for you to follow them. So that's all part of our compliance policy. And we work really, really hard at educating first, because you get more progress with education than you do simply fining somebody. If you fine somebody, they may or may not learn anything. If you educate them, they certainly learned a few things, or at least we hope they do. That being said, there are some cases where compliance policy, whether that be training or education or counseling, simply doesn't work based on the circumstances. And in those circumstances, we certainly have pursued legal enforcement cases against individuals. It's important to remember, too, I think a lot of stakeholders view the FAA like a law enforcement agency, like a police department, and we don't really operate in the same manner. We do not have the ability to arrest someone or confiscate equipment. We can't show up on site and say, I saw you fly over those people, give me your drone, we're taking it from you. We just don't have that authority. Our authority, as you were pointing out, comes from investigations. And on that note, I can guarantee you that any report that we receive of a potential UAS operation that's a violation of the rules, we investigate. And you found that out when you made a complaint. We do investigate that. So if something's happening out there that's very unsafe or contrary to the rules, we want to know about it. And so I ask that you please contact your local flight standards district office to let them know what you saw, because we will investigate it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, just because we investigate it doesn't mean we have, let's say, all the information to prove our case in court, for example. And again, we go to training, education, counseling first. Yeah. So you may make a report, we may investigate it, we may talk to that individual, and we may close out the case with airman was counseled. Now, of course, we have a record of that on file. So if another complaint comes in, well, it starts to maybe get away from, I guess counseling's not working. Maybe we need to look at a different avenue of enforcement or to ensure compliance. But nonetheless, we do look at every report we get. We investigate every report we get, and we certainly have conducted a fair amount of legal enforcement actions. It just may not be as quick or visible to the public as they're used to seeing.
Right. And you made a great point, is that if you do have a complaint, you're definitely a great resource is your local FSDO office. I mean, we have a great one here in Pittsburgh, and I've several throughout the country. This is my own experience. Every single time that I've reached out to them, it's been a great experience.
Good. I'm very glad to hear that. It should be a very positive experience.
Yeah. So I guess the last thing is to talk about is, so if whether it's a recreational flyer or a drone pilot wants to be able to really stay in touch with what the FAA is doing, what would you suggest they be able to do?
Well, there's a few different ways. One of the simplest might be just to go visit our website at faa.gov/UAS. We try to keep that up to date, and we actually do have a lot of useful information on that site for drone pilots that are flying recreationally, that are flying under Part 107, or that fly as a public entity or a public service department of law enforcement or firefighting and so on. In addition to our website, we do have social media channels that we provide information in a real-time basis as well. You can follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. So I think if there's a pilot out there flying drones recreationally or under Part 107 that's trying to figure out how do I keep up with the latest information, I would follow us on social media, because in addition to a lot of information we put out about the aviation system in the United States as a whole, there's a lot of information that we put out that are very specific to drone pilots, and I think they would find very useful to follow that information to get the latest updates on any changes or any free webinars that we may have coming up that would benefit them as well.
That's outstanding. Thank you so much for your time, Kevin. I really appreciate it. I know that our students are going to really find this information you gave very invaluable and eye-opening, and definitely adds a lot of clarity to a lot of things that are going out there. And I'm sure we'll go on another podcast at some point in the future and discussing, like you mentioned, a a calendar year in the world of UAS is like light years. So I'm sure that we'll get together soon. And thanks again for your time very much.
Well, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on and talk to you and talk to your students. It's a real pleasure, and I hope that clears up some information as well. So thanks again for having me on.
Thanks again. Okay, guys, so that's the end of the podcast. Again, I wanted to say special thanks to Kevin Morris from the FAA, and I'm sure at some point in the future we'll have him back on and do another podcast. And if anybody has any questions regarding any of the subject matter that we had discussed, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be glad to talk to you. And until next time, I'll talk to you later.